Greetings of the day to all the learners of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Open University. Today's session is for MBA first year Semester-1 course management process. We shall be talking about block 4 direction, in which the topic is centralization and decentralization, and we will focus on limits of decentralization for today. As a part of this particular course, we have a topic on delegation of authority, where we talk about how top management assigns responsibility and authority to people from their level to the lower levels in the organization hierarchy. That particular process of assigning responsibility and authority to the people from higher levels in the organizational hierarchy to the lower levels in the organizational hierarchy is called delegation. So when top management has their functions, out of those some of the functions when they give away to lower level managers, that is called as delegation of authority. Along with responsibility comes also. Now centralization and decentralization is a part of delegation, where we talk about what is the extent or the degree or to what extreme has this particular authority and responsibility being passed on to people at the lower levels. So when the top management decides to break the authority, responsibility and the work and assign that particular work to the lower levels of management, the degree to which that particular authority and responsibility gets assigned to the lower level managers is called as centralization or decentralization. In case the authority is retained at the top levels, that means top management is not handing over the authority of decision making, the authority of controlling resources, or the authority of carrying on administrative functions, then if the top management does not give away, then it is called as centralization, which means all the powers to make decisions, all the authority is upheld in their hands only. They have not passed on the authority to the lower levels of management. That particular situation, if exists in an organization, it is called as centralization, which means that all authority, all decision making power is upheld centrally by the top management, or it is upheld by few people in the organization. Whereas the opposite of that is decentralization, where you talk about breaking down the authority and giving away that particular authority to lower levels in the management, so that people who are at the lower levels are also able to take decision, are also able to use financial, non-financial resources, are also able to have decision making authority, these lower level managers. Then such a setup where the top management has given away authority to make decisions, authority to use financial, non-financial resources to the lower levels of management, it is called as decentralization. So when we talk about the concept of delegation, delegation means assigning authority, responsibility to lower levels. In case the top management does not assign or it retains the authority, it means it is a centralized setup, which means that all the decisions are taken by the top management only. In case the top management gives away the authority, decision making power and control of resources to the lower level managers, then it will be called as decentralization. So these are the basic conceptual understanding of what centralization, decentralization means. So if you see the centralization, all the focus will be only on one person or one group of people who are at the center or at the top management, and they will have control over all the decision making and all the resources of the company. Whereas in a decentralized setup, you will have many people who will be making decisions, many people who will have authority to use the financial and non-financial resources in the company. Sometimes organizations can go for complete centralization or complete decentralization. So if you see on a continuum, on a scale of centralization and decentralization, you would see that some of the companies have complete centralization, which means that all decisions are taken only by the top management. They have not given away decision making authority to lower level managers. So that will be called as complete centralization. On the other hand, some companies also do away with withholding authority at the center. They give away the authority to lower level managers. That will be called as decentralization, which is complete, where they hand over everything possible to lower level managers in the organization. These are concept wise, we understand what is centralization and decentralization. So basically it is the degree or the extent to which authority is given away to people at the lower levels. Let us now see the definitions which are being given by management thinkers in the literature of management. If you see the definition given by Louis Allen says that centralization is systematic effort to delegate to the lowest levels all the authority except that which can be exercised only at the central points. So he is talking about giving away authority at the lower levels, almost everything except only those things which are to be exercised only by the central points, that is by the central, the top management which is there, except for few things which are retained by the top management. Everything else is given away to the lower level managers. That is called as decentralization in the words of Louis Allen. For example, top management may be having the power to use the financial resources of the company in the way they want. So they will withhold the signing authority so that they only have the authority to give away major amounts of the company. Secondly, you can also have companies where top management will retain the authority related to entering into contracts with foreign companies. In case the company wants to get into a contract with a foreign company, then top management may take that particular decision. Whereas other decisions such as appointment of people, decisions which are related to renting out, leasing or letting a property, decisions which are related to promoting an employee or enhancing the salary of an employee, or decisions which may be related to training which can be given to the employees. These are all decisions which are happening in the course of action of the organization. So top management will not interfere into all these decisions. They may hand over these decisions to the lower levels. Then such a situation is one where Louis Allen says everything else is given away except for those things which have to be only kept by the central points or the top management which is there. Similarly, you talk about centralization and decentralization not only to an organization, but we also talk about this concept to a government also. For example, central government and state government. If you see, the concept of cooperative federalism follows in India also, where we talk about central government having to take some of the major decisions which are related to the entire nation and issues which are of national importance, whereas it will hand over the governance of respective states, the development of the states, undertaking of the projects related to that state, or schemes which are to be implemented in a particular state, they will hand over to the respective governments of the states which are there. So that way they will go ahead with a decentralized setup in case of governance for the states, and they will go for a centralized setup, for example in case of things like management of currency. So central government has handed over management of currency to Reserve Bank of India, which actually is a quasi-government body. So therefore you talk about, RBI which is handling the currency of the entire nation. So that way you will have decentralization sometimes given away to state government by the center, sometimes given away to independent bodies, quasi-government agencies which are there. So like that you can apply the concept of centralization and decentralization even to the governments, not only to companies but even to the government. So in this particular context of governance, World Bank defines decentralization as transfer of authority and responsibility for public functions, whatever are the functions which are related to the public. If you are transferring the authority and responsibility of these public functions from the central government to intermediaries, local government, quasi-governmental bodies or even private sector, then you call it as a decentralized setup of governance which will be there. This is especially applicable for government and governance, not for companies as such. That is the definition given by World Bank. One more definition, Earl P. Strong, he says that decentralization means division of a group of functions and activities into relatively smaller units. If a group of activity are there or group of functions are there, you divide those functions and activities into smaller units so that it can be delegated to other people in the organization who will perform that particular activity or a function. So if you see, in this particular diagram talks about centralized and decentralized structure, where you talk about D standing for decision, where you will have most of the decisions being taken with the center, then it is a centralized setup. If these D's, that is the decision making authority, is spread across the organization at lower levels in the company, then you call it as a decentralized setup, which will be there. Now, how does a company decide whether it should centralize or whether it should decentralize? How does a company make a decision that whether all the authority and responsibility should be with the top management, or should they hand over to the lower levels of management? There are several factors which affect this particular decision related to whether to centralize or whether to decentralize. So, let us see what all are the factors which are affecting decentralization. The first factor is size of the organization. If the company is small, having small number of employees and having lesser functions to perform, then in such a company it is better that the control is at the center, that is, control is at the top. Where you talk about smaller firms, there is no need for them to decentralize because work can be done quickly, number of functions are limited, number of employees are small. So, therefore, depending on the size of the company, which may be small, you can have a centralized setup of management. On the other hand, if the company is very large, where you have many branches, say for example, you talk about a bank like State Bank of India. So, State Bank of India has got so many branches which are spread across the nation, and it will be very difficult for them to control at a central point with offices which are there in New Delhi and offices which are there in Mumbai. So, what they would do, they would decentralize the functions and hand over the authority to make decisions at each branch level. So, maybe in Hyderabad, in Telangana, you would have so many branches of State Bank, and each one of the branch managers who are there, those branch managers have got the authority to make decisions related to their branches. So, because the size of the company is very huge, number of employees are too many, number of functions are many, there are so many branches of the company. So, in such a setup, it is very essential that the company goes for a decentralized management. Otherwise, it will become very difficult to take decisions if it was a centralized setup. So, the first factor which affects centralization is size of the organization. Smaller companies can have a centralized setup, but large organizations have to have a decentralized setup as such. That is one. Second is importance of decisions and the cost of those decisions. The decisions which are taken in the company, if they are of strategic nature, if they are of relevance for the whole company, if they are of relevance in the long term, then it is always better that the company follows a centralized setup. Strategic decisions, decisions which are ranging for a long period of time, that means the impact of the decision is going to be felt for next 5 years or 10 years, then such decisions is carefully to be taken only by the top management. So, therefore, relevance of the decision, importance, the strategic point of view and the impact of the decision will help the company to decide whether they should go for a centralized setup or a decentralized setup. So, the cost and the importance of the decision becomes essential there. Then management philosophy. What is the philosophy of the top management? Is the top management interested in participative management where they want to give away authority and responsibility to lower levels of management? Or is the top management having a philosophy that they will only take all the decisions? They do not want to share authority with anybody. So, whatever may be the philosophy of the leaders and the top managers in the company, depending on that also they may decide to share authority and responsibility with lower levels, or they may not share the authority and responsibility and retain all the authority only with themselves. So, depending on management philosophy also, company can have a centralized setup or a decentralized setup as such. Then you also talk about, type of business, the nature of business, depending upon whether the company is a public sector company, private sector company or a multinational company. Based on that also, the companies can have a decision whether to centralize or whether to decentralize as such. Similarly, number of branches which are there in the company, which falls as a part of size, that also will determine whether the company should have a centralized or a decentralized setup. So, the decision is not random as such. There are all the factors which are affecting whether the company should actually retain decision making authority and power with only top management, or should they give away this decision making authority and responsibility to the lower level managers who are there. So all those factors will have an impact on the decision of centralizing or decentralizing. Let us now come to what are the objectives. If the management decides that they should go for a decentralized setup, then what will that particular decentralization achieve? So what are the objectives of decentralization as such? One is flexibility. When you decentralize, there is a lot of flexibility in the company. It also motivates the employees in the organization. It boosts the morale of the employees. Employees who are there at the lower levels, they feel more happy when authority is given to them, responsibility is upheld for them, and they are made powerful in order to take decisions. So employees will feel happy who are at the lower levels to work for the company. The morale of the employee gets boosted. And also, when you don't have to get back to the top management for all decisions and taking permissions and all, decisions can be taken very promptly. At every point of time, there is no necessity for the lower level managers to go back to the top management and take approvals. When the top management has given away authority to lower level managers, then they take decisions promptly. So therefore, there will be no delay in the decision making as such. Then it will also reduce the burden on the top management. When the top management decides to give away authority to lower level managers, they can concentrate more on long-term and strategic decisions. Routine operational decisions which are of short-term nature, they can be taken by the lower level managers. So top management does not have to be burdened by the operational activities. They can concentrate on the strategic activities of the company. They can concentrate on long-term plan, they can concentrate on development of the company rather than concentrating on the routine daily operational matters. So the top management burden also will be reduced when you talk about decentralization. Similarly, you will have effective control, effective supervision when the company adopts a decentralized setup. So some benefits will come. Decisions which are taken at the lowest level will be more effective because these people are actually facing the problem. See, when the top management has to take a decision, they may not be facing the problem. For example, you talk about a manufacturing unit, a production unit, where you could be having a supervisor who is actually having to wait for all the machines to be set up so that production process can start. Now, for the machines to be set up, probably it could take around 10 to 15 minutes. Now, that cannot be assumed as a labor, rest period, because that is the time taken for the machines to be set up. Now, top management may not be aware with that problem. They may be thinking that, why is it that labor is spending so much of time on the machine? Because machine is taking time to set up. Now, that decision of setting up of the machine and the rest period given to the labor, that can be taken by the supervisor himself because he is familiar with that particular problem. Top management is not familiar with that problem. So, when you talk about decentralization, because authority for decision making is given away at lower level, so the supervisor can make a decision of how long should be the rest period for the worker, how much time it is taking for the machine to set up, and how much time it is taking for raw material to enter into the machine and do the production, etc. So what happens there, because these people are more familiar with the problem, it will become easy for them to take decisions rather than top management taking a decision because they are not familiar with that particular problem. They don't face that problem as such. That is one. Second thing is that managers will have more job satisfaction. People who are at the lower level, they will feel more happy to do the job. They will have more job satisfaction because they are taking the decisions related to the job. They are doing the job and they are taking the decisions related to the job. It so happens that, when you talk about the management pyramid, top management does thinking and lower level managers are doing the work. So thinking and doing is separated. Now here, when you do decentralization, thinking and doing both will be done by the lower level managers, middle level managers who are there. So what happens there? Managers will have a better job satisfaction. They will feel more happy to do the job because they are the people who are actually involved in doing that particular job in decentralized setup. And decisions will also be done in a more timely manner. You will have greater responsibility being given to managers who are in the early career. It will be like a training ground for those who are in the early career. But it doesn't mean that there are no disadvantages. There are also demerits of decentralizing, because you would have, managers who are in the early stages, they are not adequately trained, so their decisions may go wrong. That can be one caution which can be there. Another thing can be, because there are so many people who are taking decisions, there can be a lot of confusion. There will be lack of focus, so the company may proceed in different directions instead of having uniformity in the process of the organization. So there also difficulty can come. Difficulty can also be in terms of duplication of effort. Same activity, same decision may be taken by multiple people. So you will have duplication of effort. That can also be a problem which can be there. Same way, sharing of innovative and unique ideas can also be problematic if your immediate boss does not listen to you. So therefore, these are some of the things which are to do with decentralization, where we talk about a structure in the company in which multiple levels are there, and top management is giving away the decision making authority, responsibility to the lower level managers. So you would have both advantages and disadvantages. Depending upon the different factors, the company can make a choice whether they have to go for centralized setup or a decentralized setup. Now when you talk about centralization, there are different forms of centralization. Centralization and decentralization are extreme. In between these two, you have three major forms of decentralization. One is called deconcentration. Deconcentration means giving away only administrative discretion. That means only administrative powers are given to the lower level managers, but in some emergencies, top management can also interfere. So that is called it is not concentrated. Concentration means only in the hands of few. This is called deconcentration, where you are spreading across people. So you call administrative functions are being spread. That is one. Second is delegation. Passing on only some decision making, not everything. Only some decision making is passed on. Some decision making top management only keeps. Third one is devolution. Devolution means top management is granting powers to the lower level managers and allowing them to take full responsibility of that particular thing, which is called devolution, like how government functions. So you would have to decide whether you can go for centralized or a decentralized setup in a company as such. Now when the organization is deciding whether to go for centralized or a decentralized setup, basically in centralization also you have different types of centralization. You can have, because power is concentrated only in the hands of few, or the decision making is only at the top management. So there centralization can be hierarchical. Hierarchical means whatever is the structure in the company, that is the company has got authority responsibility relationship. So you follow a organization chart or an organization structure. So in that particular structure, if the authority and decision making powers are given according to position in the company, then that is called as hierarchical centralization. They based on hierarchy in the company you give. So for example, president of operations, he will have more powers when compared to vice president, who will have lesser powers when compared to the president or the board of directors who are there. So that way what happens, you would have to weigh what kind of powers, authority, decision making is every level in the company having, which is called hierarchical centralization. You can have centralization which can be functional, based on different functions. For example, company can have marketing, production, research and development, human resources. You can have a finance function, various functions in a company. So depending on which function every department has got, based on that authority is given away to that particular functional head. For example, if I have to take decision related to budgets, then that decision is given to the finance head. If I have to take decisions which are related to training of employees, then that decision making is given away to HR manager. If I have to take decision which is related to number of units to be sold in a particular territory, then that decision can be given away to the marketing manager. So like that, you are distributing decision making authority in the company based on the functions which are being followed. Similarly, you can have geographic centralization, where you talk about, based on the area, geography of a particular region, you talk about, distribution of authority and responsibility. So you talk about geographic, you talk about, whether it is central unit, or whether it is western unit, eastern unit, or southern north unit, which unit should be given away authority, like that you would decide. Or within a particular region also, you can make a decision of which geographical region will have more authority and which one will not have more authority. So like that you can have different types of centralization. Centralization basically will have better command, work quality will be very good, cost will be less for the company, uniformity will be there because all decisions are taken only by the top management which is there, and whatever is the long term vision of the company, that is where the company wants to be in the long run, there will be more focus on the vision of the company if you have a centralized setup as such. So same way how decentralization, there are several factors. For centralization also same factors apply: size of the company, nature of the company, number of employees, and how efficient the employees are. If the employees are very efficient, then the top management can easily hand over decision making to them. If the employees are not efficient and you are worried or fearful about decisions taken by them, the quality of the decisions taken by them, then it is always better that you retain the decision making authority. So nature of task, if the task is very routine, then you can give away to the lower level managers. On the other hand, strategic task, long range impacting decisions can be withheld by the top management in the organization. So weighing the pros and cons of whether a company should actually follow a central setup or a decentralized setup, it is always better that companies nowadays, because you talk about so much of competition and clutter in the market, so many companies competing along with your company for providing those goods and those services in the market, it is always better that for prompt decision making, for providing training to the employees, and for reacting immediately to the radical changes which are happening in the environment, it is always better that companies usually follow a decentralized setup as such. For other strategic things which are there, companies can go for a centralized setup. Most of the time companies also follow some kind of a hybrid models which are there, where you are centralizing at some points or some functions, and then the rest of the work gets decentralized in the organization. So you can have a local decentralized, you can have a segmented decentralized, or you can have a standardized central organization which can be there in the company. Usually what happens is, when you have a decentralized setup, the approach that the company follows is bottom to top. That means from the hierarchy, from bottom, the people who are there at the lower levels of management, they all have decision making authority. So the decisions are being communicated from the lower level of management to the top level of management. So you will have in a decentralized approach, bottom to top approach. But in a centralized approach, top management is making decision, and those decisions get transcended towards the lower levels of the organization. So in a decentralized setup, you have top to bottom approach, whereas in a decentralized setup, you would have bottom to top approach which will be there in the company. So depending on security, scalability, control, speed, and the cost of the decisions which are taken in the company can make a decision of whether to go for a centralized or a decentralized setup in the organization. So in today's session, let us sum up with what all we have concentrated on. First, we started with identifying what are the conceptual frameworks of delegation, centralization, and decentralization. We said that delegation is nothing but assigning responsibility and authority to people who are there at the lower levels. In case that particular authority is not assigned to people at the lower levels to a great extent, then you call it as a centralized setup. If the authority is given away to a greater degree at the lower levels of management, then you call it as a decentralized setup. So decision making being retained at the top, the organization is said to be having a centralized setup. If the authority decision making is distributed widely throughout the organization and people who are at the lower levels also have authority to use financial, non-financial resources, then the organization is said to be having a centralized setup. So the choice basically depends on several factors which are there. You talk about size of the company, importance of the decision, what is the history of the organization which is there, whether the management follows a philosophy of giving away or not giving away, what type of a company is there, based on all those things, and the benefits which can come. So depending upon how you weigh the benefits of centralization and decentralization, scalability, subject matter, control, uniformity, importance of decisions, weighing all these factors which are there, the company can decide whether they have to have a central authority who have all the powers to make decision in the company, or whether they will give away the authority and make decisions to people throughout the organization. So that was related to centralization and decentralization and limits of decentralization, which we spoke about in today's session, which is a part of your topic management process under block 4, direction, centralization and decentralization. Thank you so much.